Hi, I'm Margie TURRIN, Director of Educational Field Programs for LAMONT DOHERTY Earth Observatory, and we wanted to spend today introducing you to our section of the Hudson River. It's this, what we call wide bays region, and humans have divided it into Haverstraw Bay and Tappan Zee, but in fact it's really one big wide swath of the Hudson that's been declared by the state as critical habitat for fish and wildlife. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about that today, how that works, as well as what are some of the potential climate impacts that might be coming our way. First, we thought we'd introduce you to this region itself. So the Hudson is this deep channel, is the deeper part of the Hudson River. And then you'll see this lighter blue along the edges. That's a very shallow reaches of this extent of the Hudson. Haverstraw is actually the widest part of the river at 3 miles wide. And that wonderful mix of deep and shallow makes for warm and cool waters that move through at different rates. We also have a mix of salinity, so we have almost up to freshwater in some times of the year in some parts of the bay, and all the way down to about 1/3 of our ocean salinity. So a nice mix of brackish and fresh, deep and shallow, warmer and cooler water, which really makes this like a Goldilocks zone, a space where a lot of young of the year fish will want to be, as well as a lot of copepods and plankton thrive in this area, providing a really fun food mix for our nurseries. And speaking of nurseries, we also have some wonderful marshes along this area. We have 2 of our National Estuarine Research Reserve marshes, the Piermont Marsh, which is a brackish marsh, largest brackish marsh on the Hudson, as well as Iona Island up at the other end. And then we have 3 marshes in the Grassy Point area where Menhaden Creek and Cedarbrook Pond Creek come together, and those provide this, again, a wonderful rich habitat. On the eastern side, we have Croton Marsh, we have Georges Island has marshes, so there are a variety of other marsh habitats framing this section of the river. So we're going to spend a few minutes and dive into it now and look at what's underneath it.
Hi, my name is ZAIMA. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator at LAMONT DOHERTY Earth Observatory. Margie just talked about why Haverstraw Bay is such a critical habitat, and now we're going to dive under the water to look at the life that lives in Haverstraw. So if you were to look out at Haverstraw Bay, this is probably the view you're going to be seeing. Just a lot of expansive water of this wide section of the Hudson. But if you were to peel back the water and look beneath the surface, you can see that it is teeming with life. So as you can see, Haverstraw Bay has a huge diversity of species that lives in its waters. We're going to talk about a couple species today. The first one that I have found here, this is the American shad. The American shad has a very unique history with the Hudson. It used to be a huge commercial fishery, and the young of the year American shad, they really use this area as a nursery. Actually, shad, when they lay their eggs, they're really looking for a nice sandy bottom, which can be found in Haverstraw. So this area is not only a place for young of the year shad grow, but they also lay their eggs here. All right, we're also going to be talking about the Menhaden. So the Menhaden have a really interesting story. They're actually born in coastal waters, but in their first year of life, they come into the estuary to grow and feed. These guys are filter feeders, so they really love to live in the estuary where they can get a lot of copepods and plankton to grow into their adulthood. Then they migrate back out into the ocean where they spend most of their lives. These guys are critically important for the Hudson River and Hudson Harbor ecosystem because they serve as a food source for so many other fish, such as striped bass, bluefish, whales, and birds. We're also going to talk about the American eel, which is one of my favorite fish. The American eel are a migratory species called catadromous, which means they're actually born out into the middle of the ocean in the Sargasso Sea off of Bermuda, where these young American eel larvae called leptocephali hitch a ride in the Gulf Stream and kind of get distributed into rivers and tributaries up the East Coast. So we have a lot of American eel in the Hudson. Actually, there is a community science sampling project that happens in Menhaden Creek, which is in West Haverstraw Bay, where community members get to go out, they count the abundance of the American eels in their glass eel stage to have a better understanding of their numbers in the Hudson. So we love our American eel. They are such a special fish. All right, another one of my favorites, we're going to be talking about our sturgeon. So we have both the short-nosed sturgeon and the Atlantic sturgeon that really rely on this Haverstraw Bay as a critical habitat.
The Hudson River population of short-nosed sturgeon spend most, if not all, their lives in the Hudson River itself, and they actually use Haverstraw Bay as an overwintering area.
Now these guys, they were actually declared as federally endangered in 1967. The Atlantic sturgeon, these guys are another migratory species, but these are anadromous, which means that they are born in fresh water. They live their adult lives in salt water, and then they come back every 3 to 5 years to spawn back in fresh water. These species can be huge. They can be up to 16 feet long. They're an amazing fish that have lived during the time of the dinosaurs.
Actually, a 2007 report found that of the 562 juvenile Atlantic sturgeon netted over 3 years in New York, more than 90% of them were found in Haverstraw Bay. And unfortunately, like the short-nosed sturgeon, the Atlantic sturgeon are also listed as federally endangered, declared in 2012. So it just shows that this Haverstraw Bay region really is such a critical habitat for both our short-nosed and Atlantic sturgeon.
And our last fish we're going to be talking about today is the Atlantic tomcod. This species is also known as the frost fish because they have a really unique reproductive history. Life story, I guess. They spawn from November to February, so in those really cold winter months, they lay their eggs, and they rely on that cold water temperature for their reproductive success. So they might be seeing more and more challenges as climate change is impacting the Hudson and Haverstraw Bay and warming our water temperatures.
So one of the tricky things about climate change is that there are things we know and there are things we don't know. And we have to try and do predictions based on what we do know. We do know that the water in the Hudson has gone up almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 70 years. And we know that warmer water holds less oxygen, which will provide a more stressful environment for a lot of our fish species. They use it in their metabolism, of course, and so it slows them down. And some of our more sensitive fish, like our Atlantic Menhaden, really needs that oxygen to thrive and stay healthy, so we're concerned about that, as well as our tomcod, which really is we're at the southern end of its reach and is looking for that nice cooler water. So we know those things are coming, but in addition, we have migratory species that look for a specific temperature in which to start their movement into the river to spawn. So the Atlantic sturgeon looks for a 42 to 43 degree Fahrenheit temperature to move in. That's a pretty narrow range. Our shad, about a 50 degree temperature. But I guess the piece that we don't really understand is if the species they rely on for food and supplies will really carry them in this changing environment, because they're all, of course, linked together. Aside from warming water, we're also worried about sea level rise, what that might do to our marshes. A recent study suggested that the sediment collection in the marsh, in Piermont Marsh, is not keeping up with sea level rise, and at about 2100 we might lose that marsh. And of course the marsh in some areas has a space to move back a little bit. Piermont is bounded by the Palisades, Tallman Mountain. It has nowhere to go, as is the case for a lot of our marshes in the river. So again, we just don't know the impact. And then finally, I think I want to mention the fact that we really don't know what might happen with precipitation. So the predictions are we'll get fewer rain events, but larger volumes of water when they come. Of course, larger volumes can mean more turbidity. It can push fresh water through very quickly. We saw in earlier events like Irene, where we had a lot of freshwater input quickly, it washed a lot of the young of the year herring away. The Atlantic silverside suffered. So these events could also impact this area of the river. We just don't know what will happen with the balance.
When talking about climate change, it's so important to really focus on solutions and what we can do. So first and foremost, Supporting this ongoing data collection is so critical so we can understand how this system is responding to climate change and what we can better do to mitigate these changes. So supporting these research groups and continuing the ongoing monitoring is so critical. But what you can do in your daily life, there's a variety of things that we can do to overall lower our carbon footprint.
It's also so important to reach out to your public officials to let them know what you want to be done in your community and to vote, vote, vote. We need to vote for the candidates that put climate change at the top of their agenda. If you'd like more information about the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory Hudson River Field Station, feel free to check out our website.